The manila envelope feels heavier than paper should when Marcus finds it tucked beneath his taxi's sun visor. Content warning. This story contains disturbing themes and violence that may not be suitable for some audiences. The previous driver, Tommy Chen, vanished 3 weeks ago, leaving behind only this cab and a set of keys that still smell like his cigarettes. The dispatcher mentioned Tommy was reliable, never missed a shift in 2 years, until one morning when his taxi was found, idling outside the city morgue with the engine running and doors wide open. Tonight marks Marcus's first night shift, and as he unfolds the handwritten note, the streetlights flicker in a pattern that seems almost deliberate. The letter begins with a simple warning that makes his skin crawl. If you want to survive the night shift in this city, follow these rules exactly, no exceptions, no questions. The city after midnight isn't the same place you know during the day, and the passengers you'll pick up aren't always what they appear to be. Some of them have been riding these streets for decades, paying their fares with coins that disappeared from circulation before you were born. If you think this is just another job, you're already making your first mistake. Because in this business, your last passenger might be yourself. Have you ever wondered why so many night shift drivers quit after just 1 week? The first person to answer correctly will receive a small reward from me, the storyteller tonight, as a way of saying thank you for watching and supporting. Tell me in the comments what time you're watching this and where you're tuning in from tonight, because I'm curious how far these stories reach across the world. But remember, some rules exist for a reason, and breaking them has consequences that last far beyond dawn. Marcus adjusts his rearview mirror and notices his reflection looks older in the dim light, as if the car itself ages anyone who sits behind its wheel. The first rule is written in Tommy's shaky handwriting. Never pick up passengers after 3:33 a.m. unless they're already in your back seat. The radio crackles to life with dispatch calling his number, and Marcus realizes his shift has officially begun. He starts the engine, and the dashboard clock reads 11:47 p.m., giving him less than 4 hours before the real danger starts. The city stretches before him like a maze of neon and shadow, and somewhere in its depths the night shift rules are already taking effect. As he pulls away from the taxi depot, Marcus catches a glimpse of someone standing under a broken streetlight, waving for a ride, but something about their posture makes him keep driving. The figure doesn't move as he passes, doesn't turn their head or lower their arm, and when Marcus checks his mirror, they're gone. The radio dispatcher's voice cuts through the static with his first fare of the night, an address on the east side that Marcus recognizes as being near the old subway tunnel. It was sealed off after the cave-in 20 years ago. He makes a mental note to read Tommy's other rules before he gets there, because the envelope contains 14 more warnings, and judging by the first one, each rule was written in blood-earned experience. The digital clock on Marcus's dashboard reads 3:32 a.m. when he sees her standing at the intersection of 5th and Main, exactly where the second rule warned him never to stop. She's wearing a wedding dress that might have been white decades ago, now stained with something dark that looks wet under the streetlight. Never pick up passengers after 3:33 a.m. unless they're already in your back seat, Tommy's rule echoes in Marcus's mind as he watches the woman raise her hand to flag him down. Her movement is too slow, too deliberate, like someone moving underwater, and when she turns her head toward his approaching cab, Marcus can see that her smile stretches wider than human anatomy should allow. The clock ticks to 3:33 a.m. just as Marcus floors the accelerator, speeding past the woman without stopping, and in his rearview mirror he watches her maintain that impossible smile as she fades into the darkness. The radio immediately crackles to life with a fare request to that exact intersection, but the dispatcher's voice sounds different, older, with an accent that belongs to a different era entirely. Marcus ignores the call and keeps driving, his hands trembling on the steering wheel as he realizes the woman is now standing at the next intersection, still in that same pose with her arm raised. She appears at every red light for the next 6 blocks, always in the same position, always wearing that terrible smile until Marcus runs a red light just to avoid stopping near her. The clock strikes 3:40 a.m., and suddenly she's gone, but the radio fills with static that almost sounds like wedding music played backward. Marcus pulls over to read the next rule, his heart pounding as he realizes that whatever just happened was exactly what Tommy had tried to warn him about. The handwriting on Rule 3 is even shakier, as if Tommy's hands were trembling when he wrote it. The radio will lie to you between 2 a.m. and 4 a.m., broadcasting calls to places that don't exist. But if you answer them, you'll find yourself driving to your own funeral. Marcus checks his watch again and realizes he still has 20 minutes left in the dead zone. 20 minutes when the radio can't be trusted and the city itself seems to shift around him like a living thing. He turns down the radio volume, but doesn't shut it off completely because Rule 4 specifically warns that complete silence is even more dangerous than the lies. Marcus learned about the mirrors on his second night, when Rule 4 saved his life in ways he's still trying to understand. Never trust your rearview mirror after midnight, especially near the hospital district, because reflections have a way of showing truth instead of reality. The old St. Catherine's Hospital has been abandoned for 15 years, ever since the fire that killed 37 patients who couldn't be evacuated in time, but Marcus's mirror shows it bustling with activity every night. Ambulances that should be rusted hulks gleam like new in the reflection, their emergency lights painting the mirror in reds and blues that don't exist in the real world. Tonight, as Marcus drives past the hospital's burned-out shell, his mirror shows nurses in pristine white uniforms wheeling patients down hallways that collapsed more than a decade ago. The reflection is so vivid he can see individual faces, can read the concern in a doctor's eyes as she checks a clipboard that crumbles to ash in the real world. What makes Marcus's skin crawl is the realization that the patients on those phantom gurneys are people he's picked up during his night shifts. Mrs. Henderson, who needed a ride to dialysis, Mr. Rodriguez, who was heading to his late-night security job at the bank. In his mirror, they're all hospital patients, all connected to machines that beep and hum with mechanical persistence. Marcus forces himself to look away from the reflection and focus on the actual road, where the hospital stands as a blackened skeleton against the night sky. But when he glances back at the mirror, he sees himself lying on one of those gurney beds, hooked up to the same machines, while a nurse who looks exactly like the woman in the wedding dress from 3 nights ago checks his pulse. The image lasts only a moment before the mirror returns to showing the empty road behind him. But Marcus can still hear the phantom beeping of hospital machines even after he's driven several blocks away. He pulls over to read Tommy's note about the mirrors, finding additional warnings scrawled in the margins. The hospital wants its patients back, and the mirrors are how it chooses them. Don't let it see your face too clearly, because once you're in the reflection, you're already admitted. Marcus adjusts his rearview mirror to show only the road, avoiding his own reflection. But even with his face out of view, he can still see. That hospital room in his peripheral vision, can still hear his own voice asking the phantom nurse when visiting hours end. The regulars start appearing during Marcus's 4th night, passengers who book rides to addresses that stopped existing long before they died. Mrs. Chen, no relation to Tommy despite the name, flags him down every night at exactly 1:15 a.m. from the corner of Oak and 3rd, always dressed in the same blue coat that smells like mothballs and old roses. She needs to get home to make breakfast for her husband, she explains in her soft, scratchy voice, always counting out exact change from a purse that contains coins with dates from the 1940s. The address she gives leads to a vacant lot where a boarding house once stood, demolished in 1987 to make room for a parking garage that was never built. Marcus has driven her there 7 times now, watching her walk toward the empty space with the confident stride of someone who knows exactly where her front door should be, and every time she disappears before reaching the property line. Mr. Valdez appears at 2:30 a.m. sharp outside the old textile factory, lunch pail in hand, needing a ride to his shift at the steel mill that closed in 1962. He pays with company script that Marcus has learned not to look at too closely, because the metal tokens burn cold against his palm and leave marks on his skin that look like foundry burns. The steel mill's address now hosts a shopping center, but Mr. Valdez always thanks Marcus for the ride and walks confidently through the automatic doors of a department store, heading toward furnaces that exist only in his memory. Tonight, Marcus picks up a new regular, a young woman in a nurse's uniform who needs to get to St. Catherine's Hospital for her night shift. She introduces herself as Sarah Chen, and Marcus's blood runs cold when he realizes she shares a surname with both Tommy and Mrs. Chen, the breakfast lady. Sarah's uniform is pristine white, starched and pressed, with a name tag that reads St. Catherine's Hospital, Night Shift, 1973-1973. And when Marcus points out that the hospital has been closed for 15 years, Sarah laughs and tells him not to be silly, that she just started working there last week. She pays with a crisp $20 bill that crumbles to ash the moment she steps out of the cab, and Marcus watches in his rearview mirror as she walks through the hospital's burned-out entrance like it's made of air. The radio crackles with another fare request, this one from Tommy Chen asking for a pickup at the taxi depot, and Marcus realizes that his regulars aren't just passengers, they're recruitment officers, collecting drivers for shifts that never end. The traffic light sequence that leads to impossible roads begins with Rule 8, written in Tommy's most careful handwriting. Follow green lights only between midnight and 3 a.m. Never stop for red, because the city rearranges itself when you're not looking. Marcus discovered the truth of this during his fifth night, when following a chain of green lights led him down Maple Street, which according to every map in the city runs north-south, but somehow stretched east for 17 blocks before depositing him at an intersection that shouldn't exist. The streets he found himself on had names like Remembrance Avenue and Final Rest Boulevard, lined with houses that looked familiar but wrong, as if someone had built perfect replicas from fading photographs. Every traffic light in this phantom neighborhood showed green in his direction, creating a pathway through streets that existed only when he was driving them. And when Marcus tried to retrace his route the next day during daylight hours, he found only dead ends and construction barriers. Tonight, the green lights are leading him deeper into the city's hidden geography, past storefronts with names and languages he doesn't recognize, and street signs that change when he's not looking directly at them. The sequence tonight feels different, more urgent, as if the lights are guiding him toward a specific destination, rather than just letting him wander the city's secret arteries. Marcus passes the same bus stop 6 times, each time with different people waiting. First a family with suitcases, then an elderly man with a fishing pole, then 3 children in school uniforms who wave at him with 2 wide smiles. The GPS on his phone shows him driving in circles, but the street names keep changing. Sorrow Street becomes Regret Avenue becomes Memory Lane, and each transformation brings new buildings that couldn't possibly fit in the spaces they occupy. The green lights pulse faster now, almost strobing, and Marcus realizes they're not just changing to accommodate his passage, they're communicating with something ahead of him, something that's been waiting for him to follow this particular sequence. He checks Tommy's rules again and finds a note scratched in the margin beside Rule 8. The lights lead to the hub, where all the night shift drivers eventually report. But once you see the hub, you can never work the day shift again. The final green light ahead pulses 3 times, then goes dark, and Marcus finds himself parked outside a building that looks exactly like the taxi depot where he started his shift, except all the cabs in the lot are covered with dust and their drivers are standing beside them, waiting, and every single driver looks exactly like Tommy Chen. The phone calls from the dead began during Marcus's 6th night, when dispatch started routing him to passengers who had been calling for rides from beyond the grave for decades. The first call seemed routine. Elderly woman needs pickup at 515 Elm Street for a doctor's appointment, dispatcher said in his usual monotone. But when Marcus arrived at the address, he found a house that had burned down in 1995. The woman was waiting on the front porch anyway, or rather, where the front porch would have been if the house still existed, sitting in a rocking chair that creaked against charred wooden boards that weren't there. She introduced herself as Dorothy Martinez, showed him an appointment card for Dr. Harrison at the medical building downtown, and paid her fare with exact change that felt ice cold in Marcus's palm. The medical building had been demolished in 2001, turned into a parking lot, but Dorothy walked confidently across the asphalt toward automatic doors that opened for her alone, disappearing into a lobby that existed only in her memory. The next call came an hour later. Young man needs ride to the airport, flight to Chicago, running late. The address led Marcus to the site of a car accident from 1987, where Brian Walsh stood beside the twisted remains of a Honda Civic that had been towed away 35 years ago. Brian still wore his college graduation cap and gown, slightly torn and stained with something that might have been oil or might have been blood, and he spent the entire drive to the airport talking about his new job and the girl he was going to propose to when he got back from his business trip. The airport pickup lane was empty when they arrived, no flight scheduled at 3:30 a.m., but Brian thanked Marcus, grabbed his suitcase that weighed nothing, and walked through sliding glass doors that were locked and barred. Tonight's calls are coming faster, more insistent. Maria Santos needs a ride home from her wedding reception. But her wedding was in 1962 and she died in 1963. Tommy Chen, not the previous driver but someone else with the same name, needs pickup from the factory where he worked until the industrial accident that claimed 17 lives in 1974. Each passenger has been calling the same taxi company for decades, their voices preserved in the dispatcher system like echoes, in an underground cave, and each one pays with currency that corresponds to the year they died. Marcus realizes that the taxi company's phone system isn't just taking calls from the living. It's become a supernatural switchboard, connecting the dead to the only service still operating in their world, and every night shift driver becomes an unwitting ferryman across the boundary between life and whatever comes after. The underground routes reveal themselves during Marcus's seventh night, when a passenger named Elena Vasquez requests a ride to an address that requires a passage through tunnels that don't appear on any city maintenance map. She's waiting at the entrance to the old subway system, the one that was sealed after the cave-in, but somehow the barriers have been moved aside and the stairs descend into darkness that seems to swallow his headlight beams. Elena wears a conductor's uniform from the 1950s and speaks with the authority of someone who's been working these tunnels for decades, directing Marcus down ramps that spiral deeper than the subway system ever extended. The tunnels branch off in directions that violate the laws of physics, curving back on themselves while somehow maintaining a downward slope, and the walls are lined with tiles that shift between decades of design. Art Deco from the 1930s bleeding, into industrial utilitarianism from the 1960s, then back to Victorian-era brickwork that predates the subway by 50 years. Elena explains that these are the service tunnels, the ones the city forgot about when they built the new systems, and that passenger pickup is much more efficient when you don't have to deal with surface traffic. The other cars they pass in, the tunnels are all taxis from different eras. A 1940s checker cab with a driver who tips his hat, a 1970s station wagon with wood paneling and a peace symbol bumper sticker, and a sleek black sedan from the 1920s whose driver wears white gloves and never acknowledges them. Marcus's GPS shows them traveling impossible distances. According to his phone, they've driven 47 miles underground in what feels like 10 minutes, passing beneath neighborhoods that should be 20 miles apart on the surface. Elena's destination turns out to be an underground station that looks like Grand Central Terminal's older, darker brother, filled with passengers waiting for trains that arrive with perfect punctuality but never seem to carry anyone away. The platform stretches beyond the reach of the station's lighting, populated by travelers from every decade of the city's history, all of them patient, all of them holding tickets to destinations that were removed from the maps long ago. When Elena pays her fare and steps onto the platform, she turns back to give Marcus directions for the return trip. Follow the blue line painted on the tunnel wall, never take the red line, and if you see a station marked Final Stop, keep driving, because that's not a place you're ready to visit yet. The return journey takes him through different tunnels, past underground neighborhoods where the streetlights are powered by something other than electricity, and the residents wave from windows that couldn't possibly exist 40 feet below street level. The day shift drivers begin leaving warnings during Marcus's second week, messages scratched into the cab's dashboard, tucked under the sun visor, or whispered through the radio during the transition between shifts. Jerry Martinez, who drives the 6 a.m. to 6 p.m. shift, has been leaving increasingly frantic notes. The passengers are leaving things behind, things that shouldn't exist, things that move when you're not watching. Marcus finds the first item during his 8th night, a music box that plays a waltz in a minor key, left behind by Mrs. Chen after her nightly trip to the vacant lot. The music box is beautiful, silver-plated with intricate engravings, but when Marcus opens it, the dancing figures inside are positioned in impossible ways, their limbs bent at angles that would break human bones, and their faces show expressions of absolute terror. The melody it plays doesn't match any song Marcus has ever heard, but he finds himself humming it anyway, and the tune seems to attract the attention of things that watch from dark windows. Linda Park, who works the day shift on weekends, leaves, a sandwich bag containing what looks like subway tokens, but the metal is wrong. Too heavy, too cold, and marked with symbols that hurt to look at directly. The tokens are payment from Mr. Valdez, she explains in her note, and they've been multiplying in her glove compartment, filling the space with the smell of coal smoke and industrial metal. During the day, these items behave normally, sitting quietly in the lost and found box, but after midnight they become active. The music box plays its disturbing waltz without being wound. The tokens arrange themselves in patterns that spell out words in languages that predate human civilization, and other objects left by the regulars begin to resonate with each other like tuning forks struck in sequence. Marcus discovers that Sarah Chen, the nurse from St. Catherine's, has left behind a stethoscope that picks up heartbeats from empty rooms, and when he experiments with it, he can hear the cardiac rhythms of every passenger who's ever ridden in. His cab, including those who died decades before he was born. The most disturbing item comes from Dorothy Martinez, a prescription bottle with pills that change color based on the phase of the moon, and when Marcus shakes the bottle, he can hear what sounds like whispered medical advice from doctors who lost their licenses for conducting experiments that violated every principle of medical ethics. The day shift driver's warnings become more urgent each morning. Whatever you do, don't take the items home. Don't let them touch your skin. And, finally, they're not leaving these things by accident. They're marking their territory, preparing for something bigger. Marcus breaks protocol during his 9th night, and the consequences reveal why Tommy Chen disappeared without explanation 3 weeks ago. Rule 12 is written in Tommy's most desperate handwriting. Never deviate from the prescribed routes. Never investigate empty buildings that call your name, and never, under any circumstances, stop your cab once the engine is running until sunrise. The violation comes when Marcus hears his own voice calling from inside the abandoned department store on 5th Street, the one where Mr. Valdez disappears every night after his ride to the non-existent steel mill. The voice is definitely his own, but it's saying words he never spoke. "Marcus, I'm trapped in here. I need help. Please don't leave me like Tommy did." Against every instinct and every rule, Marcus parks his cab and enters the store through a door that shouldn't have been unlocked, following the sound of his own voice deeper into the building's dark interior. The department store is frozen in time, still decorated for a Christmas sale from 1987, with mannequins wearing fashions that went out of style before Marcus was born. But the mannequins turn their heads to watch him pass, their plastic smiles, becoming more animated with each step he takes toward the escalators. The voice continues calling from the upper floors. Sometimes his own voice, sometimes Tommy's. Sometimes voices he doesn't recognize but that sound like they belong to other night shift drivers who answered the same call. The escalators are running despite the building's abandoned status, carrying him up to a floor that contains the taxi company's original dispatch office from 1952, complete with rotary phones and a switchboard operated by women in period-appropriate clothing who acknowledge his presence with nods and continue routing calls to drivers who've been missing for decades. At the center of the dispatch office sits a desk where Tommy Chen is answering phones, looking exactly as he did 3 weeks ago but speaking in a voice that belongs to every missing driver simultaneously. Tommy looks up from his paperwork and smiles at Marcus with an expression of infinite sadness, then explains that the night shift isn't just a job, it's a recruitment system for something much older than the taxi company, something that's been operating the city's transportation network since the first horse-drawn carriages navigated these streets in the 1800s. The entity that runs the night shift collects drivers who show the right combination of desperation and reliability, and once they've proven themselves capable of following the rules, they're promoted to permanent positions in the dispatch office, where they spend eternity routing calls between the living and the dead. Tommy hands Marcus a clipboard with a job application that's already filled out in his own handwriting, and Marcus realizes that breaking protocol wasn't a mistake. It was the final test. The watchers have been standing at their designated intersections since Marcus's first night, but he only begins to understand their purpose during his second week, when their positions reveal a pattern that maps the city's supernatural infrastructure. They appear only between midnight and dawn, solitary figures stationed at specific corners throughout the downtown area, each one facing the same direction with an unwavering focus that never shifts despite weather, traffic, or the passage of hours. The watcher at 4th and Main is a woman in a 1920s coat who stares eastward toward the river, her eyes fixed on something beyond the visible horizon. The figure at 7th and Pine is a man in work clothes who faces south toward the industrial district, and the sentinel at the library square is a child who looks north toward the residential neighborhoods where most of Marcus's regular passengers once lived. For 10 nights, Marcus assumed they were homeless people or late-night pedestrians, but tonight he realizes they never blink, never shift their weight, and never react to the sound of his taxi's engine even when he parks directly beside them. Their positioning becomes clear when Marcus plots their locations on a city map. They form a perfect geometric pattern, with each watcher standing at a point that connects to create a complex symbol that encompasses the entire downtown area. The symbol resembles a transit map, with lines connecting various supernatural hotspots: the abandoned hospital, the sealed subway entrance, the phantom streets that appear only during green light sequences, and the department store where Tommy Chen now works the eternal dispatch desk. The watchers aren't observers. They're relay stations, maintaining some kind of communication network that coordinates the city's supernatural activity and ensures that the night shift operations run smoothly. When Marcus experiments by turning off his headlights and driving past them in darkness, their eyes begin to glow with a soft phosphorescent light, and he can hear what sounds like radio static emanating from their positions, as if they're broadcasting status reports to some central authority. The most disturbing discovery comes when Marcus realizes that one of the watchers, the woman at the bus stop near the cemetery, looks exactly like Sarah Chen, the nurse from St. Catherine's, but dressed in civilian clothes from a different era. And when he checks his passenger log, he finds that Sarah Chen has been riding with him every night for 2 weeks, always paying with the same $20 bill that crumbles to ash, always walking through the hospital's burned-out entrance, always maintaining her position in both the supernatural taxi network and the watcher surveillance system that monitors every night shift driver's progress toward recruitment. Emergency protocol activates during Marcus's 13th night, when the regular patterns of supernatural activity collapse into chaos, and Tommy's final rule becomes the only thing standing between Marcus and permanent recruitment to the dispatch office. Rule 15 is written in red ink that looks suspiciously like dried blood. If the city turns inside out and the passengers start arriving all at once, drive to Sacred Heart Cemetery, park beside the oldest mausoleum, and wait for the reset at sunrise, because some nights the system overloads and needs to reboot. The breakdown begins at 1:47 a.m. when Marcus's radio starts broadcasting dozens of calls simultaneously, Mrs. Chen needs pickup from 3 different locations, Mr. Valdez is requesting rides to 4 different factories, and Sarah Chen is standing at 17 different hospitals throughout the city, all of them needing transportation at the exact same time. The traffic lights malfunction, showing red, yellow, and green simultaneously, and the phantom streets begin manifesting during daylight rules, creating impossible intersections where Marcus can see the same corner from multiple time periods, layered on top of each other. The watchers abandon their positions and begin walking toward Marcus's cab, converging from all directions with their phosphorescent eyes blazing brighter than his headlights, and the underground tunnels start bleeding through to the surface, creating manholes that lead to Elena Vasquez's conductor stations in the middle of regular city streets. Marcus follows the emergency protocol, driving toward Sacred Heart Cemetery while dodging passengers who materialize in his back seat without him stopping to pick them up. Dorothy Martinez with her doctor's appointment, Brian Walsh with his graduation, gown and luggage, and dozens of others he's never seen before, but who all know his name and the location of their desired destinations. The cemetery's gates are standing open despite being locked during nighttime hours, and the oldest mausoleum, a Victorian structure that predates the cemetery itself, has its door ajar, revealing darkness that extends much deeper than the building's exterior dimensions suggest. Marcus parks beside the mausoleum as instructed, and immediately the chaos stops. The radio falls silent, the passengers disappear, and the city's normal geometry reasserts itself. From inside the mausoleum, he can hear the sound of typewriters and adding machines, the administrative apparatus that processes the supernatural transportation network, and occasionally a voice that sounds like Tommy Chen calling out manifest numbers and route changes. The emergency protocol isn't just about finding safety during system failures. It's about witnessing the infrastructure that coordinates the city's connection between the living and the dead. And Marcus realizes that Sacred Heart Cemetery isn't just where the emergency reboot happens. It's where the entire night shift operation is managed from beyond the grave. The other night, shift drivers reveal themselves during Marcus's 14th night, when the system reset at Sacred Heart Cemetery introduces him to the full network of supernatural taxi operators who've been working the same routes for decades. They arrive at the cemetery in vehicles from every era of the taxi industry. Margaret O'Sullivan drives a 1934 checker cab that still runs on the original engine. Pavel Kowalski operates a 1960s station wagon with wood paneling and a radio that only picks up polka stations, and Chen Wei, another Chen, making Marcus wonder if the surname is a requirement or a coincidence, navigates the streets in a pristine 1980s Crown Victoria that smells like cigarettes and contains a glove compartment full of business cards for companies that went bankrupt before Marcus was born. They gather beside the mausoleum every night at 4:15 a.m. for what Margaret calls shift change, comparing notes about their passengers, sharing warnings about new supernatural developments, and coordinating their routes to ensure complete coverage of the city's otherworldly transportation needs. Marcus learns that he's not just a taxi driver. He's part of a fleet that's been operating continuously since 1923, when the first night shift driver, a man named Patrick Murphy, signed a contract with something that claimed to represent the city's deceased population. The contract, which Margaret shows him in a leather portfolio that somehow contains documents from every driver who's ever worked the night shift, establishes the taxi service as the official transportation link between the world of the living and whatever exists beyond death, with each driver responsible for maintaining the boundary while facilitating necessary crossings. The other drivers share their experiences. Pavel has been driving the same route for 47 years, picking up the same passengers every night, never aging, never getting tired, sustained by whatever force operates the supernatural transit system. Chen Wei joined the fleet in 1987 after his predecessor disappeared, and he's watched the city change around him while the night shift passengers remained constant, their needs never evolving, their destinations never updating to reflect urban development. Margaret is the senior driver, recruited in 1952, and she remembers when the system was smaller, more manageable, before urban growth created the complex network of phantom streets and temporal intersections that require multiple drivers to navigate safely. She explains that new drivers like Marcus go through a 3-week probationary period, learning the rules and building relationships with regular passengers before being offered permanent positions that come with benefits like immunity from aging, protection from most forms of supernatural harm, and the satisfaction of serving both the living and the dead in the only job that spans multiple states of existence. The truth about the survival rules emerges during Marcus's 15th night, when Tommy Chen's real fate becomes clear and Marcus discovers that following the rules perfectly has been preparing him for a choice he didn't know he was making. The rules weren't designed to protect night shift drivers from the city's supernatural residents. They were created to determine which drivers possess the psychological resilience and moral flexibility necessary to serve as permanent intermediaries between the living and the dead. Marcus realizes this when he finds Tommy's real handwriting in the margins of Rule 1. The rules don't keep you safe from them. They keep them safe from you, because a scared driver makes mistakes, and mistakes in this job have consequences for both sides of the boundary. Tommy Chen didn't disappear. He graduated from probationary driver to full-time supernatural transit coordinator, accepting a position that offers job security, excellent benefits, and the minor inconvenience of being technically deceased. The manila envelope containing the rules is actually a recruitment packet, distributed by the taxi company's Supernatural Human Resources Department to drivers who show potential for advancement beyond the standard living employee category. Every night shift driver who successfully completes the 3-week probationary period receives the same choice that Marcus now faces: return to day shift driving with no memory of the supernatural passenger network, or accept permanent employment as a liaison between the living and dead, with a starting salary that's paid in experiences rather than currency, and a pension plan that extends into whatever comes after life. The regular passengers Marcus has been transporting aren't customers. They're his future co-workers, and their rides have been evaluating his performance, his empathy, and his ability to maintain professional boundaries while facilitating transportation between different states of existence. Mrs. Chen's trips to the vacant lot aren't nostalgic journeys home. She's a quality control supervisor ensuring that new drivers can handle passengers whose destinations exist only in memory. Mr. Valdez's rides to the demolished steel mill test whether drivers can provide service without judgment, even when the destinations seem meaningless to the living. Sarah Chen's nightly commutes to the burned hospital evaluate whether drivers can maintain composure when confronted with passengers whose needs transcend conventional logic. The choice Marcus faces isn't between following the rules or breaking them. It's between accepting that death isn't the end of his career opportunities or returning to a normal life where the most supernatural thing he'll encounter is late night, drunk passengers who can't remember their addresses. Tommy Chen appears in the taxi depot at exactly 5:55 a.m., 5 minutes before sunrise, looking exactly as he did 3 weeks ago, but with eyes that hold the wisdom of someone who's seen both sides of existence, and he extends his hand to offer Marcus the same manila envelope that started this journey, except now it contains a contract instead of rules, and the signature line is already filled with Marcus's name in handwriting that looks like his own, but feels like it was written by someone who knows him better than he knows himself. The passenger seat holds the final revelation when Marcus returns to his cab after declining Tommy's contract offer, choosing instead to finish his shift and return to day driving. But as he adjusts his rearview mirror for the drive home, he sees himself sitting in the passenger seat, wearing the same clothes but with eyes that reflect the phosphorescent glow of the watchers. The other, Marcus, turns toward him with a smile that stretches too wide and begins to speak in a voice that sounds like every night shift driver who ever worked these routes. Marcus, you've been dead for 3 months, killed in a car accident. On your way to your first night shift interview, and everything you think you've experienced has been your orientation process for the supernatural taxi service. because the company doesn't just hire living drivers anymore, they recruit the recently deceased who don't realize their situation has changed. The manila envelope, the rules, the 3-week probationary period, it's all part of an elaborate afterlife employment program designed to ease the transition for drivers who died with unfinished business related to transportation, navigation, or helping others reach their destinations. Marcus reaches for his wallet to check his identification, but his driver's license shows an expiration date from 2 months ago, and when he looks at his hands, he can see through them to the steering wheel beneath, translucent flesh that becomes more solid only when he's actively engaged in his duties as a supernatural taxi operator. The regular passengers weren't evaluating his performance. They were welcoming him to the community of the deceased, and their payments in obsolete currency were orientation materials designed to help him understand that economic systems work differently when you're providing services that transcend the boundary between life and death. The other drivers he met at Sacred Heart Cemetery weren't just co-workers, they were his new eternal family, bound together by their shared commitment to maintaining the transportation network that serves both the living and the dead throughout the city's supernatural infrastructure. Tommy Chen appears in the back seat, no longer offering contracts or choices, but simply explaining that the morning shift driver who finds Marcus's abandoned taxi will discover the same manila envelope under the sun visor, containing the same rules written in Marcus's handwriting, and the cycle will continue because the city's supernatural transportation needs are constant and growing, requiring a steady recruitment of drivers who possess the dedication and empathy necessary to serve passengers whose destinations exist beyond conventional geography. Marcus looks at his reflection in the rearview mirror one final time and realizes that his eyes now glow with the same phosphorescent light as the watchers, that his smile stretches with the same impossible width as the woman in the wedding dress, and that when he speaks, his voice harmonizes with every night shift driver who ever worked these routes, creating a chorus that welcomes the next recruit with words of comfort and warning. The rules exist to help you understand your situation. Following them leads to acceptance of your new role, and breaking them only delays the inevitable realization that some jobs are too important to end just because the employee has died. Subscribe so the next driver doesn't have to learn the rules alone, and remember that in this city, death is just another form of career advancement, because somewhere, in the darkness, a new driver is about to find an envelope under their sun visor, and the night shift never ends.